Here is the test by which we can make sure that we know him. Do we keep his commands? The person who says, I know him, while he disobeys his commands, is a liar and a stranger to the truth. But in the person who is obedient to his word, the divine love has indeed come to its perfection. Here is the test by which we can make sure that we are in him. Whoever claims to be dwelling in him binds himself or herself to live as Christ himself lived. Dear friends, I give you no new command, it is the old command which you always had before. The old command is the message which you heard at the beginning. And yet again, it is a new command that I am giving you. New in the sense that the darkness is passing and the real light already shines. Christ has made this true, and it is true in your own experience. So, we can read St. John there today, informed by what we have learnt about human development, about the psyche, about the mind. And although St. John there is not writing in a psychological language, what he's saying can be understood in the terms that we come to reflect upon our own selves, the mystery of our short lives, and the meaning of our experience. And Advent is, like all those seasons, is a time where we are invited to focus more specifically on particular aspects of this wisdom, not just abstractly and not just moralistically, but in terms of our own psychological and spiritual evolution. And the key element of Advent, as I've been saying, is about waiting. It's symbolized by the Advent calendar that perhaps we had when we were children, or you still see around, where you have a little window on the cardboard thing, and you open each day, you open a window, and the sense of expectation gets more and more intense as you build up to Christmas Eve and so on. So waiting, that's one aspect of waiting, that we are conscious of something that's coming in the future, and we anticipate it, and we're excited about it, and the closer we get to it, the more interested we get. So this is one aspect of waiting, but it's only one. The French word for to wait is attendre. And it gives us also the word attention. The essence of attention is this deeper waiting. Not just waiting for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and building up to the holiday or the Christmas Eve, but a deeper, fuller sense of what waiting means in terms of attention. That quality of giving ourself to another, or to a work, or to a cause, or to a community, or to Christ, giving ourselves through this work of attention. And attention, once it starts, and we'll talk about how it starts in a minute, but attention, once it starts, is the beginning of a long journey, like a relationship. There is no relationship without attention. If you want to end a relationship, just stop paying attention to the other person. That other person may well then become your enemy, because the enemy means someone that we do not pay attention to anymore. So to love your enemy means you better start paying attention to them. What does that mean? Maybe you ask, I wonder why they did that to me. That's the beginning of attention. You're beginning to love your enemy. You're beginning to pay attention to them. So attention is the essence of all relationship, and if we deny a relationship with anyone and call them our enemy, then we have denied really the whole of reality. We're blocking out God through one of the windows through which the light of God reaches us. We cannot love humanity without loving everyone in our life, paying attention in some way. So, the essence of waiting is paying attention, and the essence of attention is implicitly other-centered. To pay attention to something, to a piece of music, to the meal you're eating, to the environment around you when you're out for a walk, to a person that you're listening to or working with. To pay attention to anything or anyone implicitly means that you are becoming at least other-centered. You're making a first step in being other-centered. And to being other-centered means that you are becoming capable of compassion. And it gives us another variation on the meaning of the word attendre, or to attend. To attend to someone's needs. You thank a waiter at a restaurant for being very attentive, or for giving you good attention, or to a medical person who's giving you their care and attention. So what might begin just by opening the little windows on your Advent calendar, waiting for some imagined desired event, in fact, is the beginning of a much deeper, richer, and more spiritually transformative and more interesting discovery of what it means to love. So this is what we really mean, I think, in Advent terms by waiting. Waiting for the coming of the Lord. It's the habit of other-centered attention. Developing, that's what our spiritual growth is. What difference does it make how much you love God, or you do good works, or you run around doing good things, if you don't love? What kind of parent is it who provides all the needs for their child, but doesn't give them the essential signs of love? So this is a lifelong skill. This is the art of being human, is learning to love. Yes, of course, but let's say, to make it a bit more engaging, learning to pay attention, learning to be other-centered in the way we attend to others, wait on others. Does that mean you become a doormat for others, you become a martyr, and you expect everybody to say how wonderful you are because you're burning yourself out and you're making yourself miserable because of all the good deeds you're doing for other people? Well, we all have come across that, maybe in ourselves or in others, and we know that that isn't what it's about either. It's not so much about what we do. We do what we can do. We can only do what we can do. But it's not about what we do in the end. It's about how we pay attention. So this is the lifelong skill, the art of being human, which of course begins very early in life. I mentioned that a few days ago I was with this young couple who had just had a baby. And this little, like, small shrimp of life, which was just asleep whenever I saw her. But she had become the absolute center of everything that was going on in the house. Everything. It was part of a big operation at this house, and all the staff, everyone was, whether they were there or not, whether they'd seen this baby yet or not, everybody was revolving around this little piece of organic matter that was mostly organic most of the time. So, but what one could see in the parents was this besotted love. I mean, this was a love that, you see a couple, a young couple in first love. I mean, it was greater than that, even. This was totally, because the baby, of course, wasn't giving anything back. In romantic love, there's a sort of the delight of reciprocity. But with the baby, I mean, it's worse than a cat. A cat just takes. Sorry for cat lovers, but So this lifelong skill and art of being human begins very early in life as we receive the total attention of our new parents. And there's a physical base of this, which is very interesting, in this hormone oxytocin. So oxytocin is a hormone produced by the pituitary gland, sometimes called the cuddle hormone, or the love hormone, the bonding hormone, but it can be produced by all forms of touch. And I was once talking to a doctor who works with dying patients, and he was advising his team, the people he trains. He said, when you go to sit beside somebody who's in bed and they're dying, and he said, don't be frightened to touch them, because now you probably have to be frightened of touching anyone, but don't be frightened to touch them. And if you touch them, don't just go like this. It's the Anglo-Saxon way of of expressing your passion, this little touch. So actually, hold their hand, and stroke it a bit, and let them know that you're there, because you don't know, the touch is going to communicate such a lot. So this seems to be reflected in this biological process. What I think it shows, it isn't that it would be very stupid to say that this explains love, but what it shows is that this experience of paying attention involves the whole person. It is incarnational. That's what Advent is all about. God is becoming flesh. If God loved us so much that he sent his word into the world in order to become flesh, it's because God wanted passionately and deeply to communicate and embrace us in the way that we can experience it. This hormone, though, which shows us that our whole person is involved in this development of our humanity, that this hormone acts on all the organs of the body. It controls key aspects of reproduction, including childbirth and lactation. But it operates in men and women, I think they would say equally, although they say it's very obvious the way it works in women, but they can't quite work how it works in men, which women will probably understand. Why women, for some reason or other, it's more obvious how it works. And anyway, so maybe anyway, I won't get into that, but because you'll all start disagreeing with me. But the oxytocin is the opposite of cortisol, and it works to reduce cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone, the hormone that makes us feel overwhelmed, makes us feel isolated, makes us feel we are on our own and we can't cope, and there's no one to help. This is Martha. Martha is dominated by cortisol at that moment, and full of the pain of that feeling of separation, of not being connected. And what happens when you feel pain? You either turn it into yourself, and you retreat into more and more isolation. Maybe you end up then buying an automatic rifle and killing as many people as you can. Or it leads into depression and isolation, or you become a real pain to everybody else. You become an aggressive and violent and difficult person in every encounter. So Mary, on the other hand, we imagine, was sitting at the feet of Jesus, and as Jesus didn't mind people touching him, maybe she was touching him and listening, paying attention to his words. That's what we're told. So she's got all the oxytocin in the family at the moment, and Jesus, feeling sympathy and compassion for Martha in her pain, so that says, well, actually, Mary's got the right hormone going in her at the moment, and without that connection, without that peace and serenity and that sense of harmony, nothing that you do is going to substitute for it. So Mary has chosen the better part in that sense. So this also, this wholeness of the human process of development from childhood on, and the physicality of it. I mean, we just are able to observe at this moment in medical science, just probably the surface of the amazing miracle of the human body's role in our spiritual and human development. And culturally, we're very stuck in a dualistic level where we don't think of the body as being a sacrament or a sign or an expression of the soul, of the person, of the whole person. We think of the body as something we exploit, just as we exploit the land to get something out of it, or the body as something we dress up to sell ourselves to others. So and I think anyone who meditates for any period of time begins to, let's put it in this way, develop a new and healthier and better relationship with their own body. I think eventually you don't think of yourself as having a relationship with your body, you are embodied. There's nothing that you do, there's no meditation, there's no book you read, there's no piece of music you listen to, there's no person that you hug that isn't experienced in this embodied way. And there's no idea that you have that doesn't have an embodiment. But depending on where we start, and many people start in their heads, like Martha, separated from their body, like the character in this short story by James Joyce called A Painful Case, in which the main character is described in the first paragraph as living at a little distance from his body. So, but this embodiment is what Advent and Christmas, of course, and Christian faith and the Christian revelation, and the new command that comes from this experience of the gospel story lived out, which St. John was talking about. All of this is embedded in the stories that we tell. The incarnation, the moment of Gabriel appearing, the Nativity Scene. What do we see in the Nativity Scene? All the Christmas cards we're going to get, or we don't get Christmas cards anymore, but what do you see? You see this idyllic, peaceful scene, just like I saw a few days ago. This couple with the baby, this little sleeping baby, center of their everything, their total attention. What's actually happening? Well, we know around the story there are these shepherds who were the dirty people, the outcasts. They were the first people to hear about this. They were the first people to come in. And where was it? In a manger, because there was no room in the hotel. Do you know the story of Desmond Tutu tells of Joseph going to the manager of the hotel, and he says, "Do you have a room for the night?" And the man said, "No, I'm sorry, there's a big census taking place, so it's full." So he said, "But it's really desperate." He said, my wife is having a baby. She could have it at any moment. And the hotel manager says, well, I'm sorry, it's not my fault. And St. Joseph says, it's not my fault either. So we see the very difficult social and environmental circumstances of this birth. And then we also know that before long, when the wise men come, behind them are going to come the soldiers to massacre all the innocent children. So it's not such an idyllic little story as we may think if we just focus on the Christmas card image. Nevertheless, that moment of pure attention, of pure love, is real. But around it, there's a lot of violence and there's a lot of suffering and a lot of injustice. So, and that's true of our lives. Some are born to sweet delight and some are born to endless night, said William Blake. So some people are more fortunate than others. This little baby that I was with the other day could not be in a happier birth. Very comfortable, beautiful home, affluent, and totally loving, devoted parents. Doesn't always happen like that. And even if your material needs are being met, which for many children they are not, more than 1 million children living in poverty in the United Kingdom. So even when their children don't get enough breakfast or they, are not looked after, and there are other levels of deficiency and suffering. Not all parents can give that kind of love and attention. Or these children may be born in a refugee camp. So the problem arises, of course, in terms of our development when we did not receive this kind of formative attention early enough. And that leaves its mark, even physiologically. They say the child does not grow physically if it doesn't receive enough of this oxytocin, is not receiving enough physical attention and love and touch, even if it's being fed with the right kind of food and is in a warm manger. So, we live with the past. We cannot wipe out the past. And the past is influencing us. The consequences, for example, of a child not receiving that necessary level of love and attention creates some kind of trauma. Just as if you had dropped the child on the ground or deprived it of necessary nutrition. There's a trauma to that little squib of life. And traumas often become lodged, or the consequences, in the body or particular organs of the body. I have a friend who's a healer and who has a gift of being able to discern with a deep insight the relationship between earlier traumas and present physical illnesses or painful conditions. And Giovanni has a lot of wisdom about that as well. So the consequences of these early traumas can be lodged in our body, in our organs. So the past is with us. Advent, we might think, is about the future, or the future coming towards us. He is coming, the Lord is coming. But in a real sense, it is also about bringing the past into the present. The past that is lodged in us and that needs to be worked on. And this is the meaning of waiting. This is the meaning of attention, and it's the meaning of the healing, redemptive power of love. Because the present, what we enter into, the present moment, what we enter into, what we do the work of entering into in meditation, resolves the past and prepares us for the future. It doesn't take us back into the past, so we don't sit there thinking about the past. You may need to do that with your therapist or your friend as you share your story. That's another thing. But at the time of meditation, we're doing the work of pure attention. So we're not thinking about the past, and we're not fantasizing about the future either in daydreaming or fearing. The future will come soon enough. There's a very nice quotation, a translation from the King James Version, which we translate as, don't worry about tomorrow, tomorrow every day has problems enough of its own. This is those of you who know this translation. Take, therefore, no thought for tomorrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. So we're not thinking of the future, we're not thinking of the past, and that means we have to let go of all thoughts, because that's our default, is to go back or into the future. So we do a work of attention, that's the mantra, just to hold us gently but faithfully in this work of the present. And that's where the past gets resolved and the future is prepared for. There's no substitute for what a child did not receive when the child needed it. Very often, unless we can resolve the past in ourselves through this work of love, very often we spend our lives trying to substitute or to make up for what we didn't have. We're not conscious of doing it, usually, until it's too late, and we realize that we've made a mistake. So there is no substitute for what we didn't have. That's done and dusted, past, and we know that you walk in one direction in life. You can't go back. So you have to accept what happened, resolve it, and move on. But that's easy to say. But we can, however, turn wounds, because wherever there is a radical deficiency in us, it creates a wound. The child that does not receive this necessary overdose of oxytocin, this outpouring of besotted love, a child that doesn't receive that is going to be wounded to some degree, and probably most of us are to some degree anyway. And then, of course, even if you did receive it as a child, and even if you received it perfectly, which is questionable, but nevertheless, life is also going to teach you that love hurts, and love can be misinterpreted and misunderstood, and there's pain in separation. So there will be wounds. Hopefully, we are very overprotective, of course, to the very young, because the human newborn is more vulnerable than any other mammal. It just can't survive on its own for quite a long time. So we are very protective of the young, and we protect them from all sorts of wounds and hurts, psychologically as well as physically. But wounds there will be, inevitably. But these very early wounds are the ones that stay with us for longest. And these early wounds, nevertheless, can be turned around. They can be turned into windows. They are openings. There's nothing more painful when you cut yourself badly, when there is an opening. The first moment of wounding, of opening, is painful and frightening. And it easily becomes infected and inflamed. But they can be healed. They will leave a scar, but the wound is healed. When Jesus appears in his resurrected body to his disciples, they can still see his wounds. They say the only man-made things in heaven are the wounds of Christ. It is the healing of these wounds that enables us to become wounded healers. Because we know what it is like. And when we encounter it, this pain, woundedness in others, we have an oxytocin moment. We have a recognition. We have an insight. We are concerned. Compassion just flows naturally. We know what it is like. And if we could see into the real meaning of that phrase that we use without, of course, knowing what it means, God loves us, which is a pretty difficult phrase to really use meaningfully, we would probably find some deep empathy in God for our woundedness. Anyway, so meditation heals and transforms our wounds and deficiencies into channels of grace. Grace then pours into us, and then at a certain moment can move towards others beyond us. And the important thing, I think, is to see that healing begins as soon as the wound is inflicted. This is the meaning of our being held in God's love. So even at that very early moment when a child is suffering from the inability of its parents to love the child, or whatever other kind of wound is inflicted. At the moment that the wound is inflicted, the healing process begins. Now, we're not aware of that, just as when you cut yourself, you're not aware at first that the healing process has begun, but it is. All sorts of messages go out around the body to coagulate the blood and to begin to heal it. But if it's a serious wound, of course, you also need attention from others, from outside. If it's a minor little wound, you just put a bit of antiseptic or something on it. But if it's a serious wound, you need help. And that help comes from outside yourself. So until this healing process, which begins at the very mysteriously and invisibly, begins at the very moment when the wound happens. Until this healing process reaches a certain level of consciousness, and we can accept it and embrace it and be embraced by it. Until then, we are under the power of that wound. We are under the power, as the New Testament uses the language, we are under the power of sin. Now, obviously, sin here means something completely different from just breaking a law. Just as St. John says, the commandment that I'm giving you is a new commandment. It's not don't steal and don't commit adultery and all those things. But then he says, actually, it's the old commandment, if we really understood what the old commandment meant, to love one another. So it's through our wounds that we are healed, that we become whole. And that's the deep insight of Christian wisdom. It means that our woundedness is inevitable, and therefore is a necessary element of our human development in coming to wholeness. But also, because these wounds are deep and are inflicted on us often when we are helpless, therefore, help, care, attention, love must come to us from the outside, from outside of ourselves. And becoming aware of that is our spiritual journey. And if we're not aware of that, then our spiritual journey is just going round in circles and not taking us very far. So we'll look later at this afternoon, I suppose, what how this attention that can come to us as the healing power of grace and love from outside of ourselves. It will come to us surprisingly. It will always be a surprise, just as when a baby is born, it's a big surprise. So it will be a surprise, but we have to be able to recognize it. And be conscious of it, and give our attention to this grace that has been there from the very beginning of the wound. But we were growing up, affected and damaged by this early wound, but we were growing up as best we could until we reached the point of maturity that we can pay attention to the attention that is coming towards us and has been there all the time, just waiting for us to be ready to see it and then, of course, receive it. So we need to think about how we do that, and how we also often push it away. I think I told some of you the story of the time I was in Haiti and I went to visit Mother Teresa orphanage, and the little children had been abandoned by their mothers who couldn't look after them. Were hundreds of them, dozens of them in these little cots, and it was feeding time, so that I took her some food to give to this little boy who was in a cot, and I offered him the food, and he withdrew into the back of the cot, the bed, and looked at me with real aggression and fear, and then I offered him this food, and he pushed it away. He was 2 years old. So by 2 years old, he had already begun to develop these defenses based on this wound that he had received, which he didn't even know that he'd received and didn't understand what it meant. And however hard I tried, I didn't have enough time, maybe a lifetime, to win his trust. And that's what this passage of St. John is about. It's not. We have to take it out of its religious sort of language. Someone may say, I am in the light, but if he does not love his brother or sister, he is still in the dark. Only the person who loves his brother and sister dwells in light. There is nothing to make him stumble. But whoever hates or fears his brother or sister is in darkness. He walks in the dark, and he has no idea where he is going, because the darkness has made him blind.